Okay. Yeah, I guess, okay, it should be recording now. I don't know if you got a little thing where you had to accept it, but I
Yeah,
think
I
it
had to
is.
click on a button.
Okay. All right. So I guess before like I ask you some questions about like what's the update when it comes to Kent's legal case and the stuff regarding his appeal. Some of my viewers will know who you are because they follow your Facebook page, but could you take a second to just sort of say like what your background is and and all that?
Okay. My name is Robert Baty. I'm currently 71 and a half years old. I retired from the Internal Revenue Service in 2005. I worked in the auditing department initially, and after about 10 years there, moved into the appeals division and spent the rest of my career there, a total of about 32 years with the IRS. Back in the early 90s, 1990s, a young earth creation promoter came to my local church and said some things that pricked my interest, that got me looking further into it, stirring up controversy locally there, and then broadened out. And so I've got a particular interest in things Kent Hovind because of the income tax angle and the young earth creationism angle. And I, I don't know, I didn't take up golf. I took up Kent Hovind, for those people wondering why I don't do something else. It's just the thing that got me, and I can't get rid of it.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. For some reason, like a few years ago, I stumbled across Kent's videos, and of course, I was watching his debates and stuff, and there was something where I kind of I don't know if you were familiar with the term like hate watching somebody on YouTube. Like you don't like the
Mhm.
person, but you can't help but watch them anyway because Kent is by his nature he's an entertaining person in my opinion. But a lot of people sort of just watch him to see what crazy thing he'll say next. And then I just sort of started watching it casually, and then it just sort of snowballed into what it is now to where I'm doing it for YouTube and there's a ton of people who are interested in like what I or what you have to say. There's a lot of people following your Facebook page because you're really good at keeping track of all of like when it comes to like the court documents and just like the legal stuff with Kent. I'm more just making videos about him and stuff. So it's kind of like different angles of approach when it comes to Kent. But I know that Kent is not a fan of you or either of us really. But
I'm just an old man with a keyboard, but I've developed my way of dealing with it and become comfortable with it. Years ago, people said, you know, we don't like you around here. Start your own group, do your own thing. And so I've wound up, I've got a couple of Hovind Facebook pages and the website, and have done my thing there. And other people with similar interests have come by it from time to time. Some stay longer than others. And we've created what we'd like to think is a pretty good resource for those
mhm.
looking around, and particularly for those that may not know anything about it, but for some reason they want to Google Kent Hovind or some related issue, there are resources that we've created that'll pop up that will give them some insight, particularly that they've not seen before. For
Mhm.
years and years, I've told people that I think Kent is worthy of a lot better attention and a lot more attention from people that really have the skills to do the work to reveal to the public what that's all about. And hopefully some of that's taking place now. In recent weeks, he's gotten a lot of attention, and more people are doing more with him. And I'm glad to see that. A lot of that may be attributed to Emma's attention.
Yeah, Emma is great. But yeah, I do like to think that with like when I did the interview with Cindy, that seemed to have sort of a snowball effect to where she started talking a lot more about what was going on. And I do think that if you didn't have like your page around, or like the people like me or you watching Kent, I do think it makes a difference. I definitely would say that. But when it comes to like, so Paulogia did a video with you in, I think, October 2020. And then a year later, he did a video with me. And that video ended off, it was sort of like a cliffhanger. Like, we were expecting Kent, he had already gotten a guilty verdict. We were expecting, we didn't know what was going to happen, but he had been sentenced to technically a year in jail, but really it was supposed to be like a suspended sentence that he would serve 30 days, but it ended up that he just didn't report, and he appealed the case, which a lot of people were very disappointed in, myself included. But so what has sort of happened since then? Like, because I know a lot of people really want to know, like, is there any update so far, or like, has nothing really happened? I guess would be my question.
Well, I think nothing's really happened since then. Kent mentioned the other day that nothing more may happen till this summer. My inside sources are not so good, and I don't always get information I'm looking for. I take what I can get. As far as the legal processes in Kanika County, which is where the litigation is taking place, the trial on the domestic violence charge seemed to be handled pretty efficiently as legal processes go. There's a bench trial, no jury. The judge was convinced he was guilty and gave him the sentence. And of course, those of us that know Kent could have anticipated he was going to appeal. He was never going to show up to start serving his sentence. And, at the 11th hour, he filed his appeal. And so everything's put on hold until the court takes up that appeal, which I assume will involve, unless something changes, calling a jury and having a jury trial and getting the witnesses and the testimony and the evidence back in there. Kent, of course, proposes, boy, is he going to put on a show with his 500 witnesses and 600 recordings. The court's not going to allow that anywhere near it, but he might, get a jury and get to present his case differently, and might have a different outcome. And we'll just have to wait and see. I can see him not getting any jail time, even if he gets convicted again. A lot of people think he ought to get a more severe jail time sentence, and that wouldn't bother me any. But you look around, particularly in the context of the COVID pandemic, and you think they're lucky they could even get Kent prosecuted, much
That's
less
true.
throw him in jail.
Yeah.
But I don't think Kent would take a plea deal if he had to plead guilty to any charge, even a low-level misdemeanor with a little probation or family counseling attached to it. He's just not the type, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because he said, oh, like I'm gonna when I go back the second time, I'm gonna present 500 witnesses. But we all know there were no witnesses. It was only Kent and Cindy that were there at the time for the actual incident. So I guess he means witnesses as in people who were there when Cindy lived there. But, Kent loves to exaggerate. Like he said this exact same thing in regards to his previous jail sentence when, he did like 9 years in jail. Um, I don't know how many times he said on YouTube, like, oh, I'm innocent. Like the government broke 100 laws. Of course, he never says what the laws actually were, but he had this whole campaign, his innocence campaign, where he was saying like, oh, we're going to get the case overturned. And then he was saying back then that, oh, like I'm going to present all this other evidence that my lawyer didn't present at the time. You know what I mean? It's always after the fact. He's like, oh, well, when I get my second chance at this trial, then I'm going to present all the facts. It's like, why not do that the first time if you actually had them, because I don't think those recordings exist.
Right. It's a little too late, but that's typically uh, the way Kent operates. It's not over till it's over, he might say, or you can always file something. And so I remember hearing him saying once that pleading or accepting his guilt would be detrimental to his business. And I put what he does in that context. You see other preachers in the news almost every day running afoul of the law for one reason or another. And Kent's right, getting caught and being guilty has a detrimental impact. And he doesn't want to face that. So he's got to present this facade of innocence, even though I think he full well knows he's guilty. And that's one reason why he won't face me on his legal claims, and he won't send out his champion to face me. And on the one claim, structuring in particular, that he's harped on for 15 years publicly all over the country, that's pretty simple. And I've pressed that and presented it, and it's out there, and it's real simple to resolve and show that he's been lying about it, and that he's as much as admitted facts that will demonstrate his guilt of that charge, those charges.
Well, it's
And
quite irritating the way
his
he talks
reasons,
about that.
yeah, his reasons for not facing me are just a trumped up cover story, because he doesn't face anybody on those issues.
No.
Not in a proper way to where they're resolved. They're easy enough to resolve. He tells people, call Brady Byram. Yeah, try that. See if Brady will get on YouTube and talk to me, or anybody else that reasonably informed of the issues and Brady wants to talk to on behalf of Kent. Don't hold your breath. Peter DeTucker tried that, and he didn't get anywhere with Kent. He couldn't get hold of Brady, and that's the way it goes. He says, call Paul John Hansen, his other sovereign citizen authority. Yeah, good luck with that. Hansen isn't going to be seen anywhere publicly trying to defend Kent's legal position with a competent, reasonably competent opponent. Hansen is all about filing all the gobbledygook paperwork on behalf of Kent, and that's been shown to go nowhere. And I noticed the other day, I don't know if you saw it or not, I just ran across it because it's buried out in the California case before the bar out there, that Hansen was sent a cease and desist letter regarding his practice of law.
No, I didn't know that.
He's not a lawyer.
No.
He's always claiming to be a lawyer, but it's a play on words. and he's had a case in California for some time involving what I consider attempted mortgage fraud. And this might have arisen because out of that case, I don't know, but it's curious. The timing is the same. But he claims to be a lawyer and he does all this stuff, and he's been sanctioned before about doing that. And he's gotten this cease and desist letter out of California saying, don't be trying to pretend you're a lawyer and do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's my experience has been illegally practicing law without a license is a hard crime to prosecute. And so a lot of these people are able to exploit that, like Hansen and other wannabe lawyers doing all this stuff. Even Brady Byram recently, I don't know if you caught this either. Last summer, one of the January 6th rioters, for want of a better word, wound up working for Kent and staying with Kent on the compound. And he was indicted back in March on the January 6th deal. And so it's waiting for that case to resolve. And then this summer, he was again indicted on drug and weapons charges. And I just happened to note, in following that January 6th case, it was the January 6th case, that Brady Byram tried to intervene in that case and file an amicus brief on behalf of Kent's buddy.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me that Kent would wind up being associated with somebody like that, because he's always had close ties with people who are sovereign citizens who, do radical things against the government, like the farm, like I think it was like the Bundy farm or something like that. These farmers who had farmland that was going to be seized by the government, and they got into like a standoff with them.
Right.
Had ties with those people. But to what you were saying a second ago about structuring with Kent, I find it really irritating, because when Kent talks about structuring, he gives the exact opposite definition of what structuring is. He says that if he made deposits of more than $10,000 in one day, like more than two deposits that added up to more than 10,000, that's structuring. And it's like, no, it's if you make a withdrawal that's just under $10,000 and you make a habit of that, where you're habitually skirting that reporting requirement to the IRS, which is exactly what Kent did. But he acts like, structuring is, first he says, oh, well, this was a law to catch drug dealers, which it doesn't matter whether or not you're a drug dealer. You can still structure no matter what, if you're making a habit out of it. But he will act like that it's actually making deposits of, what adds up to more than 10,000. He's like, oh, well, we never did that. I mean, we every 2 weeks we would I would have Joe take out like $9,500, and we would spend it on construction equipment. I'm like, Kent, that's structuring. Like, you just admitted to it.
Right. He admits that he knew that the bank had a rule to report transactions of $10,000 or more, and not to do that. So he didn't, with the intent of not flagging the bank, send in a report. And that's structuring. And once is sufficient under the law. But, people with life experience regarding the law realize that as far as enforcement goes, if you do that once, the chances of prosecution are probably pretty slim. Kent did it on a regular basis And in the context of running more than $1 million through his bank account every year and not filing tax returns.
Right.
So it's not just that he was making innocent financial transactions that happened to be contrary to the law. It was part of a lifelong habit of breaking the law.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point.
And I think I have a pretty good idea where Kent gets his false notions, because Brady has harped on it so much, not in the particulars, but indirectly. If you listen to Brady enough and Kent enough and check the history and some of the litigation, you'll see that the rules actually say one transaction is enough to be structuring. That's why Kent had 45 counts of structuring instead of just one or two or six. Each individual transaction under the law was counted as a violation. And years ago, excuse me, the IRS came up with a rule administratively that if a person makes 2 transactions in a day that go over $10,000, the bank needs to report that. That has nothing to do with whether or not structuring took place. It had to do with whether the bank should file a report or not. I'm pretty sure it's Brady's misunderstanding of that, which has led Kent to promote the false notion about structuring.
Yeah.
Because that's clear enough in the record. And the case Brady cites, Reinis, R-E-I-N-I-S, I think, he says, that's where I win the case for Kent, because Reinis, on appeal after his conviction, was acquitted because the appeals court said he didn't violate the rules because the rule had not been properly promulgated. Brady likes to use that term, promulgated. The IRS didn't properly promulgate the rule. And that's true. The IRS fouled up, and after the Reinis case, they fixed it. But the rule was not properly put in place. And so Reinis could not be convicted of conspiring with the bank to violate the rule. But they fixed that, and it doesn't have anything to do with Kent's structuring issue. And that's another explicit scenario you can lay out that Kent and Brady don't want to face. Kent now seemingly tries to play ignorant and always talking to Brady. Brady did a breaking laws. Brady knows more than anybody. Kent knows more than anybody.
Yeah.
But he tries to make it look like I'm just taking Brady's advice, and he's a paralegal.
Yeah.
I don't think he's even a paralegal, but he likes to claim he's a forensic investigator or something, and so he knows all about it. But he's flat out wrong on Kent's case, and he won't face it or anybody that knows enough about it to intelligently discuss it. And Kent knows it. And of course, Kent, who's had 40 years to know everything inside and out about his whole case history on all the issues, he's not about to accept his personal responsibility and admit to guilt.
Yeah, well, Kent will never admit to any wrongdoing or mistakes. It's not in his nature. But I wanted to touch on one of the things that you said, because I think that it's a critical point, because one of the things that Kent does, and I think this is the reason that he got a lot of people on his side when, especially right after he got out of jail, was when he would tell people, they would ask him, well, why did you go to jail? Like, you're a preacher. So many people were shocked that Kent was in jail, especially for so long, because they didn't know the facts of the case. And what Kent would do is that he would tell them, oh, well, I went to jail for structuring, for taking my own money out of my own bank account. And that's the only thing he mentions. But what he doesn't say is that the structuring is connected to the failure to withhold FICA taxes and Social Security taxes, and the way that he paid his missionaries under the table with cash instead of paychecks that could be taxed and tracked back to the government. And so what he would do is he would send Joe. He never made the withdrawals himself. He would send Joe to the bank, withdraw $9,500 every 2 weeks like clockwork, and then he would pay his employees cash instead of something that has a paper trail, and it wouldn't be taxed. So the structuring is a crime in itself, but it's also connected to the other charges that Kent got. And if you don't know the whole picture of what he was doing, it seems like I could see how somebody would be convinced of like, oh, well, if you were just making withdrawals, why did they send you to jail for 9 years for that? But Kent is withholding information. He's basically lying by omission, by not saying that other stuff.
That is part of what he doesn't always, or would rarely explain, is to put in context. And part of that same context, which he, to the nth degree, leaves out even more, is that all that money going through his personal bank account, he was never reporting as income to the IRS.
That's another thing. Yeah.
And those, again, with life experience regarding how our legal processes work, prosecutors reach a limit as to what they want to criminally charge people with and prosecute. And the IRS is no different. And in this case, speculating, they got to the point where the criminal case involving the employment taxes and structuring and obstruction was clear and convincing to them. There are additional risks when it comes to criminally prosecuting someone for income tax evasion. So his personal income tax case went a civil route. The employment tax and structuring and obstruction went the criminal route. Kent doesn't like to talk about at all. He'll talk about those employment taxes and the obstruction and praying for the agents and those trivial details in his criminal case once in a while, or if you press him on it. But he really doesn't like to get into the personal income tax case, which took a civil route. And he it's a whole story in itself. But to try and shorten it right now, he lost that as well. And it includes, when he talks about they didn't get me for income tax evasion. Well, in his civil case, the fraud penalty was proposed and imposed and sustained on appeal. So the fraud penalty for each of those years, I think there's 9 years worth of income tax returns involved. For each of those years, the fraud penalty was imposed, which is a monetary penalty, not a criminal penalty, but it's the fraud penalty. And so nobody should have any reservations about accusing Kent of income tax evasion based on his own civil case, which he lost.
Yeah. Well, if you had to, I guess, sort of speculate and make a prediction, like what do you think is going to happen we're in the new year of 2022. So what do you think is going to happen with Kent regarding YouTube? And, he's sort of been in hot water with YouTube, getting a strike and getting a suspension for a week. And what do you think is going to happen like with him this year, like regarding that and I know you touched on his court cases already, but
yeah, I don't know. Him and Matt seem to want to team up and be on every platform. It looks like they've tried that and it's not working out so well, and they're falling back to their main YouTube channels,
mhm.
which, for those that might follow him closer than I do, they might see little indications that he's trying to keep the YouTube censors satisfied so that he doesn't lose those channels. I don't mind him being on YouTube because it's a way I can keep up with what he's doing and report
Sure.
on it. If he wasn't on YouTube, I might go out of business.
Right.
But
Yeah.
from YouTube's perspective and the critics otherwise, he may be a good target for additional strikes, and maybe he'll go bye-bye. His number one promoter,
Standing for Truth.
no, the old one, Lone Star 1776. He got involved with Kent, took off 6 months to go full time when he was having his additional litigation back in 2015. And he was on every day, several times a day at times, promoting Kent Hovind and his innocence and his prison pen pals. And he was kind of strange fellow too. But YouTube finally zapped him. He'd been around for years and years too, doing his own little thing without much attention. But he got hooked up with Kent, started doing more stuff, and YouTube finally zapped his main channel. And he had thousands of videos, and so it is possible that Kent's channel could go the same route as that guy if he doesn't be more careful.
Well, Kent is a very stubborn person, but even he knows that the reason that he got in trouble with YouTube is specifically regarding saying stuff about COVID vaccines and medical misinformation. Because in the video that me and Emma watched with Kent, there's a section where you can tell that he's referenced, because Emma brings up how YouTube has been deleting his videos and how he's been flip-flopping back and forth between the Dinosaur Adventureland channel and the Kent Hovind official channel, and just mentioning that he's been violating YouTube's TOS. And he started talking about that, and you could tell he was holding back because he wanted to reference exactly what it was, but it was just really obvious what he was not saying. So Kent knows that he can't be so explicit when he's talking about that subject, but he also has Matt Powell's channel to fall back on.
I think I posted a comment the other day in that regard about the apricot seeds.
Yeah,
I noticed
that.
Kent recently got into talking about apricot seeds, and it seemed like he was being real careful in how he framed his promotion of it. He didn't personally say this will cure your cancer, but he said some people say it will cure cancer. I think they're right. Which might be safe enough to keep the censors away, but other people that know Kent see what he's doing, and maybe he can toe that line. Maybe not. Maybe he's got enough people watching him now that when his toe slips over that line, they'll be filing those complaints or making those reports. And so he will always be looking over his shoulder now if he's on YouTube, thinking they're ready to pounce at any minute. And that's good.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been reporting his videos, and he should be careful. Like, he shouldn't be saying that he agrees with those people that it's a cure for cancer, because first of all, it's not. apricot seeds are dangerous because they contain cyanide. You should not take them. But actually, Eric Hovind got in trouble with the FDA, I believe, for selling those apricot seeds on his website, and he got like a cease and desist from them and had to specifically change the language on his website. He was still selling them, but he could not say that they're a cure for cancer, which Kent basically said outright on his video the other day. He did sort of skirt around it, but yeah.
That's the
Kent,
message. You got cancer, try this.
yeah. And I have to wonder because it's like, I can't imagine that's like a big money making thing for him. I don't know why he would put himself at risk just to say that, especially after not bringing it up for so long. It was weird. But
Well, the whole natural foods, vitamin stuff is part of what he's connected with Bill Sardi on to some extent. I don't know the details, but it's kind of fascinating that he and Bill Sardi are together. Bill Sardi being one of his directors for the tax exempt
the trustees.
creation science operation. And I wouldn't have expected it, but the other day, some time ago, when I was researching Bill Sardi, who has a domestic violence issue with his ex-wife and divorce and a lot of related issues I was not aware of previously, which begins to look analogous to Kent to some extent. But I found out Bill Sardi must have a real successful history in that business. He's about 75 years old now, not around Kent's age and my age. He's 75 years old or so, but apparently he's been real successful, kind of like Ernie Land and his multi-level marketing schemes. Ernie Land seems to not have to worry about finances, and Bill Sardi seems to not have to either. His house showed up in my research, and it's like $2.5 million house out there in California, a pretty fancy place. And that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, that is curious. But I guess one last subject I wanted to sort of touch on, and then I'll let you go because I know you're a busy individual. But regarding Kent, so Kent did a video where he mentioned vitamins, and he said like, "Oh, well, Bill Sardi, he keeps me very healthy with the vitamins I take from him," even though he's like coughing during that video. And I thought it was kind of funny that Kent said in a later video, like, "Oh, if you take too many vitamins, the only thing that will happen is you get expensive pee." And I'm like, "No, Kent, you can overdose on vitamins." But I don't know if you saw Kent's video yesterday, the Whack and Atheist with Matt Powell. But to me, Kent did not look or sound good in that video. He sounded bad.
A number of people have noticed he seems to be not looking so well, and he's coughing a lot, and he said, "Well, my mother had that cough for 40 years and now I've got it." Yeah, I've got a cough too, not quite as bad as Kent's, I don't think. So you never know what he's really dealing with, because we know he doesn't always tell the truth or reveal all the details. You follow any of his litigation, and he never just comes out and tells you what's going on with his cases. Don't expect him to tell you what's going on with his health. I've, in a lighthearted way, been thinking, well, the reason he's looking so pale and worn out and maybe coughing a little bit more is he hooked up with a woman 17 years younger than him. That could have something to do with it. She's wearing him out.
Maybe. I don't even, wow, I didn't know that it was that big of a difference. But yeah, at the end of the video, even yesterday, I saw Kent was saying, "Oh, like I can barely talk anymore." And Kent is somebody who talks all the time. But
answering
his
the
cough,
phone all day long.
yeah, well, he never answers when I call him, but um, he looked like his color was off. Like he looked sick to me. And we know that people at DAL, they don't wear masks and they probably aren't vaccinated. And one thing that I saw was curious is that, Kent does not know how to use a computer. So Matt Powell is sitting next to him and Kent is coughing into his hand, a lot and using the mouse. And then there was times when Kent would try to be doing something on his computer and he would be needing to switch between the PowerPoint and the YouTube, like the browser. And Matt Powell just end up grabbing the mouse and doing it for him. And I'm thinking that seems like a good way to spread germs.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, but a lot of people have asked, and it's like I said earlier, if there's any COVID issues on the compound, we're going to have a special agent in there undercover to tell us what it might be, because Kent is not likely to do so unless it shows up in the local paper. Earlier on, James over in Bruton, the weather guy, would publish COVID information about the local counties. I haven't seen any of that recently, so I don't know what the current situation is for Kanika County as to COVID. But I noticed yesterday, James posted on his Facebook page that his son had come down with COVID. And so it's down and around there and people coming and going, and apparently no mask required or any other social distancing or anything else. Kent and Matt are real chummy up there before the camera. So you might expect there's an issue there, but whether or not we ever get the details is yet to be seen. Unless it becomes a health crisis that makes the news, we may not hear about it.
Right. Well, I guess I'll just ask, do you think that Kent will spend 2022 as a free man? Do you think he won't see the inside of a jail even for even another arrest at all?
I don't know. I'd like to think somebody's watching him. I mentioned earlier, I think he's entitled to a bigger spotlight with more professional interest, investigative reporters and media. But law enforcement may also have an interest. We just don't know what's going on. Did you see what I posted the other day about Cindy's case against Steve Lynn for the property damage on her rental property?
I saw some of that. I didn't see like the specifics of it, but I did read some of that.
One of the documents I posted from that case was a letter Cindy wrote, or a motion. I think they treated it as a motion. Maybe to allow her witnesses out of state to appear by Zoom. But in that letter, she mentions she has at least one more case against Kent Hovind planned, and maybe two. And she also commented that she had received a call from the sheriff's department or something. And while not giving any details, her letter mentions that they mentioned federal investigators.
Oh, wow.
So that's posted in the group and in my website article on the Lincoln versus Lynn case. So we've heard rumors about what the FBI might be doing in Kanika County for a long time. And it would be nice if they have any interest in Kent Hovind for that to ripen to where we get a public press release or something about it, and maybe find out Kent needs to go back to jail for something.
I agree. And more information will always be good. Well, if people are curious about seeing the stuff that you have posted on there, where can they find your social media presence? Like where would they go? And I'll put the links in the description of the video too.
I'm never good at just rattling off the URLs, but I have my website plus the 2 Facebook pages. One is public, or Facebook groups. One is public and one is private. And I say from time to time that the private group is for the added protections having a private group allows, where people are trying to attack you all the time, which has been our history. Kent and his people and other adversaries like to attack us. So we set up this private group, not because we're keeping these things secret, but to have those added protections. And it seems like they have worked out rather well that way. But you have a private group and a public group, both specializing in the Hovind issues.
Yeah, and it's Kent Hovind's worst nightmare, right?
That's the Facebook groups, right?
Okay.
And people, from time to time, people will hit me up as being a little egotistical to assume that title. While I think it's fitting, it comes from the fact that Kent Hovind's own self-produced biography was entitled Kent Hovind, an Atheist's Worst Nightmare.
Yeah.
I don't know that any atheists are afraid of Kent, but I know Kent's afraid of me. So I think the label works better for me than it does Kent.
Yeah, it does seem like his worst nightmare would be debating you on structuring.
Yeah. And
But
no reason, we don't want to take ourselves too seriously. We
yeah,
have a little fun along the way.
yeah, I think it's funny. Well, thank you for coming on and doing this. I think it's
Okay.
I've been a lot of good information, and I really appreciate you taking the time because I know there's a lot of people who, like you said, when we were offline, who don't follow this as closely as we do. People who are normal, I guess. So I wanted to put something out because I keep getting comments of people who are asking me about this stuff, and instead of answering all of them, I figured the best way would be to just put out a video like this where we could just sort of go over like what do we know about what's going on with the case, and like what can we predict with any type of certainty about what might happen in, it's a new year, so we don't know what will happen, but we can sort of speculate. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for asking me. And depending on the feedback you get, you'll have some idea of what additional territory you might cover if we do it again.
Yeah, definitely.